Well, good evening and welcome to The Big Story. I'm Nupur Talwar Suri. Now, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has admitted to having succumbed to pressure from the Biden administration to censor certain content on its platforms. In a letter to the US House of Representatives, Zuckerberg said that they had to make some changes that with the benefit of hindsight and new information that they wouldn't have made today. Now, there are two parts to the story. One, the admission that the Meta boss was arm-twisted and that he gave into that pressure at various points. And the other is the implications that this could have on free speech. Joining us on the show are Deepro Guha, Senior Manager at Quantum Hub, and Kazim Rizvi, Founding Director of The Dialogue. But first, we play out this report. Good evening, gentlemen. I'm just going to come to you. But first, of course, as I was earlier saying, we play out this report on Zuckerberg's letter from NDTV Profit's Alisha Ali.
Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has admitted that Facebook was repeatedly pressured by the Joe Biden government for months to censor content, particularly regarding COVID-19. In a letter to the US House of Representatives, Zuckerberg said that the platform had to make some changes in content moderation. Zuckerberg said that the White House repeatedly asked them to censor content, even including humor and satire. When Facebook did not agree with the censorship, the Biden administration expressed a lot of frustration. The Meta CEO said that ultimately it was the company's decision whether or not to take the content down. However, the government pressure was wrong and he regrets not being outspoken about it. Zuckerberg recalled another episode in the letter. He said that FBI warned Meta about a potential Russian disinformation operation about the Biden family and Burisma in the lead-up to the 2020 elections. Following this, Meta demoted a story on corruption allegations involving Joe Biden's family. But Meta CEO claims that reporting was not Russian disinformation and the story shouldn't have been demoted.
All right, so that is in a nutshell what happened today. Coming to you first, Kazim. Now, Zuckerberg's admission, of course, points to how much governments actually would like to influence content on platforms, and perhaps that platforms also need to do their homework before they succumbed to this pressure. How do you view the disclosures that have been made by the Meta CEO today?
I think there are 2 points. I think one is on the whole COVID-19 situation, and the second is around Hunter Biden. Let's just look at the COVID situation. That was a unprecedented situation back in 2020, 2021. We were living in times which required certain actions related to public emergency. And what we have seen in media with regard to the letter is around satire, content which is sort of in a light way, which is being pushed out on platforms. Now, obviously, the letter states and the media report state that Facebook was asked to moderate those type of content. And there is, if you look at it, it's a 50-50 case. On one hand, yes, public emergency, unprecedented situations do require greater amount of action on the part of platforms to make sure that the platforms are sanitized, and especially related to COVID-19, which was a pandemic at that time. But again, there is also a case of free speech, and the fact is free speech is subjective. It differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In the US, you have the First Amendment. So free speech is definitely an absolute right. But that applies to state. When it comes to private parties, that is not necessarily the case. So if you apply that logic, then definitely companies may need to alter, may need to sort of look at correcting or taking down content wherever it's needed, especially in cases of emergency, which was definitely at that point of time. On the other part of the letter, in which media reports are coming out with regard to Hunter Biden, I think definitely if you look back in hindsight, Mark Zuckerberg is correct. He shouldn't have taken it down because there was no evidence with regard to the Russian disinformation campaign. So these are all subjective actions. It differs from different countries to different countries, and platforms usually try to keep content on their platform as much as possible. Obviously, there will be certain requirements on the part of the state, and the government has a right to request takedown wherever it deems necessary. and the platforms can then go to court or take a different action or a legal recourse. Um, in this case, it appears that they reached out privately, which is also all right. I think it depends largely on where you are operating, when it comes to these issues.
All right. Let me go across to Deepro now. Now, how do you see this in the Indian context? And do you think that due to certain cultural sensitivities that are involved in India, India perhaps may be a more complex sort of a case?
Uh, Most definitely, the contextuality of content moderation in the case of India does make it a little more complex. We have so many different languages, so many different dialects, so many different cultures. And that plays out in the social media platforms when it comes to posting stuff, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, etc. But having said that, just zooming out a little bit, I would like to right off the bat mention that any sort of government control on free speech is problematic, and anytime the government gets involved with telling platforms what to take off is always a little bit problematic, because then it gets into the zone of controlling narratives, controlling what oppositions have to say, etc. Which is why today most liberal democracies have systems in place where only really illegal stuff is allowed for the government to take down, for them to tell the platform to take down. And even then, there are checks and balances in place, like written orders, review of these orders, etc. Now, in the Indian context, as Kazim was saying, we don't have an absolute right to free speech like the US does, which is why it's a little confusing as to why the report that you were talking about, Meta, adhering to those government pressures, why it went down like that. But in the Indian context, we do have certain exceptions to free speech. And these play out in our IT rules, where it's a detailed list is given as to what a social platform should not have up, including misinformation, stuff that is injurious to the security of the nation, essentially. And ultimately, it is for the platform to figure out what those things are, and those are of course vague. They aren't like direct answers, right? It's not a 1 or a 0. And this is and in the Indian context, then that plays out in different contextual elements. What is the security of the state? What is sometimes caste is, what is not caste is. This is understood as different in different points in the country. So that's the problematic element. And then when the government gets into such vague questions and offers takedown orders, etc., that's where it sort of gets problematic.
Right. Kasim, the other part of it obviously is that the letter also opens up the debate about the role of social media companies in shaping public opinion. Now, this is done by influencing information that is available to the people. In this particular point, the Hunter Biden episode particularly does seem to highlight that Facebook did try to control the kind of information that was going out. Now, whether it was due to US government's pressure, that's another point.
Yeah, possibly that may be the case. I read somewhere that they were trying to demote the content which was being uploaded on Facebook. But it's very tricky waters when it comes to managing requests, and especially if these are all private requests or requests which are being made by the government to say, okay, look, we don't want to we don't want you to promote X content or Y content. Um, Ideally, process should be through a legal process. I mean, the takedown process should be through a legal sort of letter. And in India, we have a very robust process when it comes to content moderation or content takedown. So in the US, I think the challenge lies with platforms is finding, okay, what kind of content should we take down and what not, especially depending on the current political situation, depending on how platforms are usually taking down, depending on how aggressive the governments also may be when it comes to requesting platforms to take down content. So there is no correct answer, there is no right answer when it comes to this. But I think what should be followed is the due process of law, right? And the law provides for both. The law does provide for content takedown when it comes to national security purposes or public or trying to restore public order. And the law is very clear that, look, the governments have that power. So definitely the governments are a key stakeholder. Not all request or not all moderation is wrong or bad, but I think what is necessary is, are they following the due process of law? And when you have checks and balances, those checks and balances have to be met. And that is again a decision which usually it's up to the court to decide if the matter goes to court. But yes, there are instances when many times we have seen globally governments trying to sort of put pressure and ask platforms to take down content which may not be legal in the local jurisdiction. And I think here we have to understand the difference between legal versus harmful content, right? Your content may be harmful, but it may not be illegal. In those cases, content should not be taken down, right? And if you look at the Western democracies, they have a higher threshold of what you mean in terms of content which may be even offensive to somebody or to a particular community or whatever that may be, which should also stay on the platforms, right? So looking at those thresholds and looking at the genuine state of play, definitely it is something to review when it comes to the role of the governments. But I think at the end of the day, transparency is critical. And it's important that even if let's say there are requests for content takedowns, it's all in the public domain. There are public conversations, there are discussions, so that we can also review and see how platforms are implementing some of these requests. Because it's important for platforms to make sure that they contribute to public harmony. Now, if you look at a public emergency situation, maybe you have to maybe go a little bit beyond the call of duty to take down content.
Now, you mentioned
but
the process.
Business as usual may be different.
Right. So you mentioned the process of law, but do you think that process actually takes a backseat when politics is concerned? Because in this particular case, it does appear that something that was a political that was essentially political in nature was taken down under the garb of national security, because what we understand is that the Biden administration did try to take down this case, saying it was perhaps a Russian misinformation campaign, and it has happened in several other countries as well.
Yeah, in hindsight, yes. If you ask me, in hindsight, possibly yes, because at that time, it's also difficult to adjudicate, okay, whether there is a disinformation campaign or not. You would probably err on the side of caution if you're a platform, and you would probably take it down because these are matters of national security which are beyond platforms which governments have to deal with. And security is a prerogative of the governments. But if you look back now, then definitely that was something which even Mark Zuckerberg admits shouldn't have been done. So, but it's a very tricky, these are very tricky waters to swim for platforms, and it's not easy, but it's good that we are having these conversations now.
Absolutely. Deepro, now, what are your thoughts on the timing of this letter? Because the letter comes at a time when the US election campaign is getting heated, and Zuckerberg has said that they intend to stay neutral. But has that damage already been done? Because we've seen the kind of discourse that's playing out in the social media already.
Well, it's difficult to comment on the US, presidential race. But surely the timing of the letter will have impact on people's minds, because something like this, which talks about the Biden-Harris administration back during COVID times, that will definitely impact, because there's been so much talk about COVID, what is science, what is not scientific in the case of COVID, and then us going back to those days, those thoughts and those arguments. This is definitely going to play a role in people's mind. But in terms of the US political system, it's difficult to comment on that.
Right, both of you, thank you very much for joining us on The Big Story. As Kazim said, this is a conversation that needs to be had on a larger scale, perhaps before more ramifications come to the fore.